get going. That'd be great.
Do some early afternoon review with Tracy's dad.
Just open up the class sort of.
I'll do some early socializing.
If anybody has any questions about anything.
Do it.
Yeah.
I want to try to help if I can, just to clarify. Any questions, issues? Anything I can help with? Nothing at all? All right, well, as I said, I'll assume everything's okay if I don't hear from you. You may remember when we left off last class was just talking about the text court case, and we kind of ran a little short. I apologize for having to kind of shoehorn text court into kind of the last part of the class. We did want to cover a couple more things about the case, and then we can move on to our topic of the day, which is communication. Are we okay, Aaron? Yeah, these two handouts coming around. Be sure you get both. One of them is an extra credits project I'll describe in a minute. The other one is just a set of slides and information for today. Well, like I said, why don't we go ahead and start off with sort of finishing off the text form discussion. One thing we didn't get to actually was problem statements. And because we did kind of discuss the case last time, I'm not expecting anybody to have their problem statement fresh in their head. I did want to give you an opportunity if you wanted to share your problem statement, especially if you're looking for just some feedback on whether it's the kind of problem statements that I like to see for a class like this, because of course that's relevant for your upcoming case.
They need some more copies.
So, what do we run out of?
Let's slide.
Just here? One extra? Do you have any? Couple extras?
No.
Yeah, okay. Somebody's got stalled here. That's okay, so great. So again, I just want to give you guys an opportunity if you wanted to share problems. You don't need to. What did you see as being the major problem with the text court case? I think I said as it pertains to power and politics. We've kind of focused on political blunders by Mitchell. That's not necessarily the most important problem. What do you guys see? Okay. Yeah, maybe not so much a direct power and politics problem, but certainly, yeah, just, plummeting profitability and all kinds of issues wrapped up in there. Other problems?
There wasn't a whole lot of communication.
Okay.
So just lack of communication.
Okay. Yeah, so really not so much of a power and politics problem once again, right? So for your case analysis, just make sure you guys are, targeting your problem statements, particularly, very directly toward those topics. But yeah, I certainly agree with that as being a very important problem in here, just, terrible communication across the various individuals, inside this case. So yeah, very good. Other problem statements, what do you guys see? It's okay if you don't want to share any others. Kind of for last time. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so kind of connected to that problem of poor communication is sort of a lack of coordination, right? A lack of information sharing apparently across the major divisions and of course across the individuals in charge of the major divisions. Just kind of a train wreck from that standpoint. But yeah, good. Any others? Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Lack of direct objective.
Okay. Yeah, there's a lack of direction. You don't get sort of any sense, at least I don't, from reading the case, that there's kind of any, clear vision, driving objectives, major sort of, focusing objectives going on in this organization. So yeah, which again is not I think, exactly a problem, power and politics problem like the rest of these, but certainly can be. Right? We talked about how uncertainty breeds political behavior, and so you could easily shape that kind of problem statement into a discussion of power and politics. So good, very good. Any others? One more place? Anything no problem. Just wanted to give you that opportunity since I just kind of ran out of time in my class. The other thing that I wanted to spend a little bit more time on was to see if you guys would be willing to share any examples that you have about political mistakes that you've seen people make. It could be yourself, but please you don't have to make it personal. You could speak in the third person or whatever. But something you've experienced, something you've gone through, maybe a friend that you know of, something you read about. My point here is just to simply get some examples on the table of mistakes you see people make. They can range from simply sort of a loss of credibility, kind of a one-time loss of credibility, to what we refer to as political suicide, where your career is basically over in a particular company. And I want to just share these stories just so, as we all get out there, we can, benefit from hearing them so that hopefully we can avoid any of these mistakes in our own future. So many political mistakes will seem obvious, but you see them so often that maybe it's not quite as obvious to everybody as we might think, and sharing some examples I think might be potentially useful to head off problems in the future. So is anybody willing to share an example? Angela?
Is that proper from just talk about the Watergate scandal?
The Watergate scandal, sure. You can lay that out as an example.
Project, but I don't think I should talk it about because everyone knows it.
Okay.
Yeah, so that is the
Well, that's okay. Yeah, just as a good general example, right? Very major political blunder of various.
But it is not my experience.
Yeah, that's okay. That was certainly a historical example of a major political blunder. But again, we're not so much talking about kind of national politics. We're kind of talking about company politics, right? So if you can think of an example that would be more within a company, an employee doing something that caused them to lose credibility, power at some level. Go ahead.
I mean, you have to backbiting, talking
Okay.
and other people into your personal information like that.
Yeah, okay. So that's a kind of a good category that might even trigger some specific examples. It's sort of, bringing in too much personal information to the workplace. Certainly there's a line to be walked there. As we'll talk about in just a little while, actually providing a little bit of information about yourself can have some benefits in the workplace. One of which is trust building. People tend to trust you more if they feel like they know a little bit about you, right? We've also talked about some advantages as a manager, of trying to, not be so completely distant. So part of being kind of a supportive manager involves getting a little bit personal. But of course, there's a very important line you don't want to cross over.
When you
And
think
that's
about
what
other
you're
people's
describing.
personal lives.
Oh, okay. So not just your
about other
own.
people's personal lives.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so not only getting your own personal life too involved, but also gossiping, right? Talking about other people's personal lives is a great way to cause yourself to self-authority. So yeah, that's kind of a big category, but a good one. So that's a good quick way to lose power is to be gossiping, right? To be discussing other people's lives inappropriately in the workplace. Other examples. Sit down over there.
I guess I think one is, well, I was working for a company and there's two owners in the company. And I was, there's also two managers and three owners. So I was not only manager, I was about two guys. And I was really close with both the owners. And we would go out and fish with one of them or we'd go boating, we just hang out and have just friends. One day I skipped work with one of the owners. And I don't think the other owner noticed too about it. Before we went out, I'm kind of pulled up, I came up with horse under the cow. And I guess I could have really got myself in trouble because he got pretty mad at me. In our next meeting, like corporate meeting, not corporate meeting, as far as our next meeting with both owners and me, I brought that up kind of as a joke, but it was a personal thing that we did outside of work that brought us in, and I think the other owners found out about it, got pretty mad at him.
Okay.
So I guess that's one way to really screw up a lot of things. It's bringing in personal things that, personal relationships, what do you know, professional, I guess.
Okay. Yeah, so the issue wasn't so much that you had taken time off work to do this, right? It was more about the
Bringing in.
too much personal connection going on there. Yeah, good, yeah. I appreciate the example. What others come to mind? It doesn't have to be yourself. In some ways better if we don't even talk about ourselves, but what have you guys seen out there? What do people do that all political blunders that we haven't kind of already talked about in the slide here? or you must have seen something. What about, did you give an example? Maybe we'll allow you to piggyback into something else. What about people getting drunk at the company party? You know, not uncommon to see somebody make that mistake. This is a good one to, remember. Often not a problem to have, a drink or something at the company party, but if you end up finding yourself having too much, pretty easy way to find yourself suffering politically, and you end up embarrassing yourself or somebody else at a company function. Another category is, you mentioned fishing, right? Is fishing off the company pier, right? Otherwise known as office romance. A very easy way, again, to suffer politically. Office relationships don't always, but often end up badly, right? Some of them lead to marriage, but those that don't, tend to have kind of bad endings, and unfortunately, one of those parties often end up suffering. People talk, the gossip starts, people know people, someone got hurt, before you know it, there's bad blood in the workplace, and as rumors spread, it just becomes a real tough situation, again, for one or both parties. So again, I'm not saying you should never, engage in office romance. I think we might even hear more about this in one of the workshops. Fraught with difficulties, let's just say, and certainly a risky thing to do from a political standpoint. Yeah.
Not knowing who you're talking to.
Okay.
When the judge comes through, and the judge that's in the Ninth Circuit, and this is Idaho Central Tower. And he is, Judge Ramsden, is very pro-Idaho, and I'm not from Idaho. I had just landed in Idaho myself, came in, and didn't realize how pro-Idaho he was. And he made a comment about how I like Idaho, and said, well, I'm getting used to it. I wasn't so sure about it. And he gave it a disparaging Idaho joke. And then later on in the Q&A session, he was talking about how he only hired clerks from Idaho or from Idaho connection, or who are very strong. So pretty much wrote off any code of ever becoming clerk for that. But
Correct. Yeah.
just
Right.
what I wanted to learn about how much I was getting used to how it was smell of Idaho.
Right. Yeah. People certainly carry around with them sensitivities. Whether it's their favorite sports team or affiliation like you're describing with the state or a region. Yeah, just as you say, gotta be careful about who you're talking to, especially if they're in a position of power and stepping on certain sensitivities can be an issue. It also just kind of triggers a thought of inappropriate joke telling in the workplace, right? Just because you think a joke is funny, of course, it's not at all suggest that other people are going to think it's funny, especially if it's even a potentially off-color kind of joke. So in some cultures that can be appropriate, where kind of everybody tells off-color jokes, and that kind of environment is probably fine. But in many professional corporate environments, I always encourage you to lay off the joke telling, especially if there's any chance that it's got kind of an off-color element to it, at least as how somebody might perceive it. Just be very careful about joke telling, passing emails and things like that. The forwarding chain emails, which again can be offensive to somebody. Just obviously be smart about this. Okay, well, no other examples come to mind, or if you don't think of any others, I'll give you just one more. They come from my own family that you might find interesting. Sort of a story about lost power that was really hard to see. We've kind of all talked about examples of where maybe somebody should have seen this coming, like getting drunk at a company party. But here's one you might find interesting. I'll try to make a longer story as short as I can. My father was on the fast track to become potentially the president of IBM decades ago. He was identified as one of about 5 or 6 individuals. This, by the way, companies do frequently. They'll kind of groom people. They'll kind of identify maybe 4, 5, 6 people who they think really could potentially be a CEO type in the future, and really give them the choice assignments, train them, groom them. Hopefully one day one of them, will or may emerge into that position, and then the company, obviously gets paid off for taking the time to groom that person. And he was part of this short list. And along with that, he was given, he was in the sales function with IBM, and was given IBM's top account, largest account, which was Sears at the time, and to be the manager of. Again, kind of boiling this down, what happened was very shortly after my father was given this account, Sears made it very clear that they didn't want my father on the account. but Sears had not been appropriately consulted as to who, IBM's manager was going to be. From Sears' perspective, the problem at least partly appeared to be a function of the fact that my father at the time was living in Chicago, and IBM's headquarters is in New York. And Sears wanted somebody who was a little bit, more clearly tied in at corporate headquarters in New York. Not that my father wasn't tied in, but there was kind of a perception that maybe he wasn't tied in adequately because he was living in Chicago. And so basically Sears, revolted, said, we don't want someone from Chicago on our, managing our account. And basically embarrassed, the higher ups, the people ahead of my father, who would put him in charge of the account. And one of the truisms of corporations, which I think is a little bit less true today, but still true, it was truer then, was if your boss makes a mistake on you once, chances are pretty good they're not going to want to make a big embarrassing mistake on you a second time. And so my father ended up being basically, transferred just because of this mistake. Red-faced boss takes my father and sort of sends him off to IBM Siberia, which at that point was kind of a smaller operation in New York State, but not near the headquarters. And my father's career was effectively finished at that point in IBM. So just kind of an interesting example of where, by in this case taking, what sounded like a wonderful, neat promotion, ended up being essentially, an inadvertent but actual political blunder. Now, I'm not sure what the lesson is there, in terms of saying, wow, should I not take promotions or whatever, but you got to be careful. You never know. Sort of the point is you never know what could end up costing you politically inside an organization. Sometimes, of course, you just can't see stuff like that coming, which I think is probably true in a case like this. But the point is, you can very easily, having found yourself, building up your reputation and building up your, perception for years, it can all come crashing down fairly quickly for all kinds of reasons. It doesn't have to be just getting drunk at the company party, right? It doesn't have to be just, pissing your boss off by saying you hate the Red Sox or, whatever people are into. It could just be something like this story here. So just please, be aware of the political winds and do what you can to try to avoid in situations like this.
Well, I was just seeing if you thought that the political blunder was taking the promotion, or if it was on the part of the local assigned to that.
Yeah.
It's getting
Right.
to stop working with IBM.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I think, if you want to call it a blunder, I think the blunder was really part of my father's supervisors not adequately checking Sears first. But he was the one who suffered ultimately because of it. Yeah. I mean, I'd be hard pressed, I think, to say my father committed a political blunder, but he sure suffered politically because of decisions that were being made. So, yeah, I'm sure all that's arguable. The case is more complicated than that. Again, just sort of a thought for all of us to be aware. I hate to see a situation where any of us ends up suffering politically because of any kind of decision. So anyway, we'll go ahead and close that off since you guys didn't have any other stories, but that's fine. Hopefully we can all get out there and I don't want to make us all paranoid, but hopefully we can all get out there and do a good job of navigating the political landscape and avoiding the kinds of pitfalls that we see of people like John Mitchell and the Okay, but otherwise we can go ahead and move on. That's our section on power and politics. Hopefully you guys are getting a lot out of the chapter also. But beyond the chapter, I would like to go ahead and move forward to our new topic, which is communication in organizations. And hopefully everybody has the handout. Why don't I go ahead and test you guys and start filling out the front, if you wouldn't mind. I know you take a lot of surveys. This is another one. If you haven't already started, please fill in the front page. And then if you flip to the second page, it gives you the scoring. As always, please fill this out in terms of how you actually are, not in terms of how you think you should be or want to be. Try to be honest in terms of how you actually are.
Do what it can. How's the back?
Oh, it's nice. My arm's a little tired. There's no rest for them. That's cool. Why am I worked out?
You could try this one.
Yeah, I could. You just lean back a little. Thanks, buddy.
Maybe another minute or two to finish up. It looks like several people are already done. Again, if you haven't already, please flip to the second page for the scoring. By the way, is I think a fairly interesting individual difference factor that we're measuring. We'll talk about it a little bit later in class. We're not going to get into this right away. I just wanted you to take the survey. Last maybe one or two people just finish up here. Why don't I go ahead and explain the other handout that I gave you for today. You'll see that there is the second handout begins with a letter. Dear Management Operations 593 students. Letter from me. What you've got here is an extra credit opportunity, which is just that. It's totally optional. It's extra credit for the class if you choose to do it. The extra credit I will offer on this will be 20 points added to your class contribution grade. And I will go over 100. So if you're going to get 100 anyway, I'll give you 120, percent on your class contribution grade. So I think that hopefully can be meaningful for you, especially if you're somebody who just for whatever reason doesn't want to do discussion questions or otherwise get some extra credit for your class contribution grade. If you choose to do it, I'd like to ask for it by, let's say, to set some kind of deadline on it. We'll say 2 weeks. That would be the 22nd. I guess we're not class that day, do we? So we'll make it the class after that, which would be what? Like the 27th? Do you have a calendar handy?
27th is a Tuesday.
Tuesday. Thank you. Okay, yeah, we'll make this due on October 22nd. So I think plenty of time to do it if you choose to do it. Let me also note before I forget that there is this survey, that this it's a questionnaire which is actually online. If you take a look at my class website, just find my faculty webpage, you'll see a link to my personal webpage. There's a link to this class 593 on there, and extra credit or handouts or something. You'll find the survey on there. Basically, all I'm asking you guys to do is to dig into your own experience and I'm asking you to describe an incident that you've seen in some real-life corporation where some individual engaged in harm, in some way harmed another person, some other party inside an organization, and then took steps somehow to try to make it right. There are lots of ways that can happen. There are lots of harm that gets done in an organization. Lots of ways that people try to do something, positive to make it right. But another researcher and I are trying to gather stories in that category to try to learn a little bit more about how that happens in the workplace. And we figure gathering some stories is a good way just to learn a little bit more about how that goes on. So as you'll see, there are actually sort of two parts to this survey. I'm only asking you to do one of them, though. The first part would be, and this is what I'm hoping that you'll help us by doing, which is to come up with an example of where you did this personally. I think the best stories are going to come from things that happened personally, which I know is kind of a sensitive thing. This is, it's an anonymous survey, or at least completely confidential. Your answers are not going to be connected to you in any way. Where you ended up harming somebody in the workplace and then took steps to make it right. So we're hoping for those kinds of examples. If you're just not comfortable giving a personal example or you just can't think of one, then you can do the second part, which is just where someone in the workplace harmed somebody and then took steps to make it right. So it really is fine to do part B, but we're kind of hoping for good part A stories where it's more of a personal experience that you really, went through. And as you can see, there are just several questions. We're asking you to sort of describe the incident, what was the harm, what did you do to make it right, some questions about the context and things like that. It's just part of a larger research project I'm doing with a professor in Vancouver, New Jersey. So your help is appreciated. Hopefully the extra credit is worthwhile. And let me know if you have any questions. Yes?
Is this exclusively within the workplace environment, or does this translate to school?
I'd like it to be in the workplace environment. That's kind of what we're trying to get at. Having said that, it can be quasi-workplace, like the military. I know there's a sort of background that you would have. That would be fine. But not school examples, not family examples. We're hoping for organizations, non-school organizations. Having said that, I guess I should qualify that. If it's kind of like a class-related example, then I would say please no. But if you work for the university, that ends up being a legitimate work organization, and if it's that kind of example, that would be fine. It's just not a class student kind of example. Any other questions? Yeah. So as I said, the survey is online. I'm guessing for a lot of you, it'll probably be easier just to just type it out and fill it out online, and then you can just email it to me if you choose to do it that way. Otherwise, you'll have to maybe kind of reproduce this somehow and fill it out that way. So if you want to turn in the paper copy, that's great. Online, I'm guessing it's probably going to be easier for most who choose to do it. And again, your help is appreciated if you're able and willing to help out. Okay, no other questions about that? Let's go ahead then and move into our next topic, which is communication in organizations. We sort of have two parts to this. We're going to begin by talking about some pretty general kinds of issues that pertain to communication. Things like barriers, things that prevent us from being able to communicate as well as we might or as well as we hope to in the workplace. Some of those kinds of things we'll discuss first. Then for communication part 2, which will definitely not be till next class, we'll be talking about sort of focusing in on one of the more important, arguably, issues of feedback for communication for a manager, and that's giving people feedback. I'm sure many of you have experience giving people feedback. For most of us, it's pretty easy to give positive feedback, but giving negative feedback is not an easy thing to do. For most of us, a lot of managers describe it as being one of the toughest parts of their jobs, is to be able to take someone who's not performing well and to give them the negative feedback that you feel that they need to be able to improve. So that's the end for next time. We'll talk about feedback here. For now, kind of some of the nuts and bolts of communication in the workplace, things that I think your chapter doesn't quite talk about enough. First of all, let's give a definition. We define communication as the exchange of messages between persons for the purpose of constructing common meaning. That may be a little bit different from definitions you've seen in communication in the past. There's a reason for that. One reason why I like this definition for our purposes is this last phrase in the definition, which is sort of saying that, in business, as managers, we communicate for a particular reason, or at least there's a very purposeful aspect to communication. And that is this idea of constructing common meaning. And I want to turn to you guys for some thoughts to make sure that we're sort of clear about what that is all about. What does that mean? Constructing common meaning. What does it mean to you? What do you do as a manager? Do you try to construct common meaning? I want to try to construct common meaning by talking about this. What's that all about?
Well, when you say something, I may interpret it differently than how you meant it. So by constructing, putting expectations out there or stating when I want something done, I mean like this kind of everyone. Just making sure that both parties understand exactly what's being said.
Yeah, very good. Exactly right. It's kind of built on an assumption, right? Well, I should say it this way. There's a bad assumption that managers commonly make, which is that everybody sort of perfectly understands everything that you're saying, right? I make this mistake as a professor. We all make it. It's impossible to be a perfect communicator, arguably. So we all kind of make assumptions. But as we say things, that we're being somehow clear, that everyone is understanding perfectly. If it gets to this idea of ideal communication, right? Where we kind of hope, at least, that we can move toward ideal communication, where we're creating, an image in the mind of the receiver that's in exactly the same details as that which is intended by the sender. Unfortunately, we rarely, if ever, can achieve ideal communication. And so that's kind of the bad assumption that leaders make, is that they are engaging in ideal communication. When in fact, things mean different things to different people, right? An example of that would be, one of the big pushes we see in the modern workplace today is the idea of sustainable development, sustainable business practice. So managers will say, okay, we're gonna do this. We're gonna make sustainable practices our competitive advantage, or whatever, and push hard on that without taking adequate steps, arguably, to make sure that everybody's on the same page as to exactly what that term means. Because actually, sustainable business practices can mean very different things to different people. And in fact, can mean radically different things in some cases. For some people, sustainable business practices are all about just, creating wealth for shareholders. Right? Whereas for other people, it's kind of, a very opposed view of sustainability, which is more about the green aspects of business, making sure that you're, preserving the environment for future generations, and that's what being sustainable is all about. So, talk about, opportunity for miscommunication. When you throw out a term like sustainable development, you want to make sure that you're talking, particularly and have discussions, feedback back and forth, and try to get as close as you can to ideal communication, so that everyone's on the same page about exactly what you mean when you use a term like that. And of course, it can be ideal, it can be sustainable development. It can be something even, more common, where you say something like, we're not performing well in the workplace. Well, what does that mean, right? That can mean very different things to different people. So, again, you can't spend all your time clarifying every single word that you say, but the point is, to try to realize that arguably part of the point of your job, or a big part of your job as a communicator, is to try to do what you can within reason, to construct common meaning so that everybody is as much on the same page as possible, and to try to move as far toward ideal communication as you can. And by the way, this is another way that some people will define leadership. Like, this is a class on leadership. We've already sort of said one big picture way that people define leadership has to do with that tadpole theory idea of gap filling. Remember that from the previous class? Some say leadership is gap filling. This is another way that some people will define leadership. Some will say that leadership is constructing common meaning, that that's what you do as a leader. I'm not saying I advocate necessarily either of those, but I'm just sort of saying that that's how some people, would basically define leadership, just suggesting its importance once again for this topic. Leadership is about constructing common meaning. I'll give you guys, again, kind of a related issue. One of the things that I used to enjoy doing with my undergraduate students was to send them out with an assignment. I think I'm actually doing this with one of my classes this semester. I send them out and have them analyze an organization and basically find the organization's mission statement and find out what the organization is trying to do. And then interview some employees, managerial employees, non-managerial employees, and try to find out the degree to which, what the company is doing corresponds to its mission statement. And part of the process, one of the things that I ask them to do is, as they interview employees, to ask them what they think the mission is of the company. And the students are always amazed at how often, how common it is for people to have absolutely no idea of what the mission of their organization is. Even managers sort of no sense of what the organization is actually trying to accomplish, which I know sounds maybe a little bit amazing, but I might ask you to think about your own work experience. You probably worked for any number of companies. Did you know what your organization's mission was? Maybe you did, but in some cases you didn't. Which again just kind of speaks to this idea that managers just kind of assume that. Frequently, they sort of assume that everyone knows what the organization is trying to accomplish at kind of a big picture level. But in reality, a lot of times employees, including managers, really don't have a very good sense of what the organization is all about, what it's there for, what it's trying to do. So, it again puts a premium on this topic. That you as a manager hopefully can do a little bit better job with that than some managers out there, and try to engage in this process of trying to use good communication skills to construct common meaning. So everyone is on the same page, not only in terms of smaller goals and issues and projects, but big picture stuff. That's what your company is all about. That's what its mission is. So anyway, that's kind of a little bit to set up the importance of this topic. Another way of getting at the importance is to go back to that Nitzberg article that I had you read, The Manager's Job. I don't recall the number that they used in that article. I think they used 85%. Different sources will give you different percentages, but they're all hovering somewhere around 80%. The point simply being, communication, in particular direct verbal communication, is what you do as a manager, right? Most of your time, whatever number you want to hang on there, is spent in direct verbal communication with people. And that's even in addition to, nonverbal communication, typing emails and, texts and whatever else you do when you communicate with people. So a vast majority of your time is spent communicating. Again, suggests the importance of this topic. And as I think we all have kind of a sense of, communication is not just verbal. We often tend to focus on the verbal side of communication, but very importantly, communication involves both verbal and nonverbal signs and symbols to help us create, understand, to pass understanding and to gain understanding. And so for that reason, and because people can sometimes forget about the nonverbal side of things, or at least don't, engage adequately in, an appreciation of the nonverbal side of communication, I want to spend at least a few minutes on this topic. One thing that may surprise you, considering given what I've said about how I think a lot of us, when we think about communication, we think about the verbal side of things. Actually, communication, pretty much any textbook or major study in the world of communication will tell you that communication is actually largely nonverbal. And if you kind of add up the how much information is conveyed to people verbally versus nonverbally in communication, more than 50%, and according to some studies, way more than 50% is passed along through nonverbal methods. So we have to pay attention to this topic, or at least be smart to pay attention to this topic as managers. The second bullet kind of gets at the idea that I'm sure many of us are familiar with. Whenever you're getting conflicting cues from somebody, where someone's words are not really fitting their actions, which should you pay attention to? Right? The nonverbal, right? Part of this comes down to the fact that people lie all the time. Folks will, and I'm not just talking about blatant lying. I'm talking about shades of the truth. Little ways that people deviate from just, hardcore truth frequently when they talk. People can be pretty good at acting, saying things that differ from the truth. I'm sorry, I said that totally backwards. What I was trying to say was that, although people can be deceitful in terms of what they say, most people are not very good actors, right? They can't fake their nonverbals very well, right? So often the truth is being projected from a nonverbal standpoint. So, whenever the words don't quite fit the nonverbal cues, trust the nonverbal. That's typically where you'll find the right answer. And all this, by the way, the importance of nonverbal information, trust the nonverbal side of things, I think should be interesting in particular to a chunk of people in this room. What I'm driving at here is that there's a pretty good body of evidence out there suggesting that about half the population lives in a very verbal world. Right, meaning that they tend to focus on the verbal side of things. So they focus on how they're talking, what they're saying. When other people are talking to them, they're focusing very much just on the verbal part of it, the words that are being passed back and forth, and pay very little attention to nonverbal cues. The other half of the population is more on the opposite side. They live in a much more nonverbal world. They process verbal cues, but tend to pay much more attention to people's nonverbal cues, are better at giving good, accurate, nonverbal cues to people. So again, about half the population lives in a more verbal world, the other half lives in a much more nonverbal world. Who am I talking about?
Kids and adults.
Males and females, right? Men and women, right? And guys, because women live in a much more nonverbal world, they actually have a tremendous advantage when it comes to communication, not just in the workplace, but in life in general. So, I think we can all improve, I'm sure, on our ability to, process and use, nonverbal communication effectively, myself included. This is particularly pointing this statement to the men in this room, right? Because men tend to focus much more on verbal information. Is it any wonder you get interesting, arguments, conflicts across the genders? You know, where you hear the guy will be saying something like, you know, aren't you listening to what I'm saying? You know, hear my words. And the woman is saying something, is maybe not saying anything, but she may be thinking something like, yeah, I hear your words just fine. It's your nonverbal cues that are telling you something very different, right? And so you end up with, you know, just very significant and interesting differences across the genders because they're focusing on different things. Angela.
Because of the globalization nowadays, so for companies hiring international employees are more and more popular. Yeah. So I think nonverbal communication is more and more important. And believe it or not, in some countries, there are some people who will say yes with waving head, and
Right.
will say no, nodding head.
Yeah.
So if unfortunately you hire the people from that country, what will you do? I don't know.
Yeah, very good, right? I mean, it brings up such an important topic that not only, of course, does the use of verbal and nonverbal communication differ between genders and things like that. Very much differs across cultural contexts, right? And maybe we'll try to carve out some time here to give some examples, right, about how nonverbal cues are very much used differently in different cultures, and verbal information as well. But yeah, your point is very well taken. That in a global context, right, it becomes even more important for us to be able to understand and learn more about other people's nonverbal cues and what they mean, depending on what kind of individual you're dealing with, and what culture they're coming from. So very good point, and just a very important topic. Hopefully, we can spend a little bit of time on that. So thank you. Yeah. Well, anyway, yeah, I was just kind of talking about gender differences. I'll focus on that for more for just a minute. You end up with, there are some pretty funny studies out there, at least I think they're kind of funny, where, for example, men and women will be divided into the groups, men and women, and will be given a bunch of pictures by actors showing different emotions. One of them is like laughter, another one is showing sadness, another one is horror, and so the participants in the study will be given a stack of pictures with all these emotions being shown, and then also a separate stack of labels. So you've got sadness label, horror, whatever, laughter, and you got to put the right label with the right picture, right? But women, in general, no exceptions. Women in general have no problem. Lay them right out and put the right label with the right picture. Men will pick these stacks up, and first of all, take a lot longer to do it because they're not as certain. But we'll end up making just many more mistakes than the women will tend to. They'll look at a picture and think that it's horror, when in fact the person's laughing. They just have very little ability, or at least much less than women, to be able to accurately interpret, facial expressions. Just sort of simple things like that people are projecting. So again, just important for all of us, men in particular, to be able to do a better job of understanding and processing nonverbal cues. Types of nonverbal cues, certainly this is only a partial list. People will communicate nonverbally in many ways, through body language and body motion, through the use of eye contact. Personal space kind of gets into the idea that how far you stand from somebody when you speak to them gives nonverbal information about how intimate you feel with them. This again varies by culture, right? But in some cultures, like in the U.S. culture, for example, you would typically, only speak within a couple of feet to somebody with whom we're very intimate. You tend to hold strangers out at about 8 feet, someone that you've never even met before. Those ranges, of course, tend to be much more constricted in other cultures, where personal space is more confined and means different things. But the point simply is, as you talk to somebody, whether you, bring them in close or whether you keep them farther apart, sends a nonverbal signal to that person about your sense of intimacy with that person. Physical space is another element of nonverbal communication. When you go talk to a professor here in a college, does the professor have his or her desk between you? Experts in this field will talk about how desks like that end up being a power barrier between yourself and the instructor. Basically, putting the professor kind of on a higher power plane than you by the use of that piece of furniture. Or does the professor kind of have their desk off to the side? You're sitting in chairs on a much more equal plane, without those power barriers between you. So just an example, right, of how physical space, office space can be used, and is used as a form of nonverbal communication. Paralanguage is a big category involving just about anything that has to do with qualities of the voice, or anything having to do with kind of the mouth and voice that's not the words themselves. So examples would be voice qualities like the volume with which you speak, the rate with which you speak, pitch, even things like laughing and yawning are all forms certainly of nonverbal communication. And then clothing, right? That's another category where there's a reason why the policeman or policewoman who pulls you over is probably wearing dark colors, maybe a tall hat, reflective sunglasses, right? All intending to convey a message of authority, to put you into a relatively less powerful position. So clothing is another category of nonverbal communication. You know, and again, I'd love to spend a ton of time on this. There are entire courses, you know, that basically focus in on things like nonverbal communication. We only have a little bit of time here, but I do want to spend a couple more minutes on this topic. And I'll do it in an area that I think is relevant to everybody here, you know, with career fairs and such things going on. And that's the context of the job interview. You guys, maybe we'll just focus on a couple of areas here. Body language and body motion and eye contact. What are some things that end up being conveyed either by the interviewer or the interviewee during an interview that have important nonverbal information associated with them? What are some examples? Okay, leaning in, which tends to convey what? Yeah, so if someone's leaning in, it could mean other things, but it often is interpreted as suggesting interest, right? As opposed to things being away from, but it would be suggestions of being less interested. What else?
I was going to say almost the opposite. In our mock interviews, sometimes you get really comfortable and having back and not about months or maybe you felt like being scared about the job.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, so there you go. That's an important nonverbal cue that a person could give off. You don't want to be leaning back in an interview. It's important to be leaning forward because whether or not you're intending it, right, the point is that it gets interpreted as being less interested in, you know, more casual, as opposed to someone who's leaning forward. That tends to be interpreted as being interested, engaged with what's going on. So yeah, very good. Other examples.
The interview avoids eye contact. There's more ceiling
Yeah, great. I mean, eye contact, of course, is a very rich category. Right? Tons of stuff gets communicated through the eyes. In the interview, as you're suggesting, there's kind of an appropriate amount of eye contact, which takes some practice, right, to kind of get it right. Again, it's cultural, it's sort of culture specific, and so you've got to be, you know, potentially aware of cultural issues depending on who the interviewer is or interviewee, et cetera. But yeah, you give a good example, sort of if the eyes are kind of going up or down, you know, that can be interpreted as all kinds of different stuff, right? One of which actually is dishonesty, right? There's research suggesting where the eyes tend to drift when a person is lying. Just because a person's eyes go up into the left or to the right, doesn't necessarily mean the person's lying. But you don't want it being interpreted that way. Certainly, you know, if you're the interviewee, you want people to think you're lying. So it's important to make sure that you're aware of where your eyes are going and to try to, you know, basically lock in there as much as you can without, you know, 100% staring the entire time. You want to break eye contact sometimes, but you know, but a good amount of eye contact, at least in the U.S. context, of course, is usually a good strong signal, confidence and caring and all sorts of things that are, you know, going to be important to be projected. So great, very good. Other thoughts about eye contact? Because there's again a lot more that could be said, or even other kinds of body language. Oh, I do this all day. I'd be curious about a couple of other examples. Yeah.
I was just thinking about a buddy of mine who he says he's horrible at interviewing,
Okay.
and I can kind of see certain things that would make it that way. Like he gets really tense and kind of gets the Jimmy legs, you know, just starts hopping up and down, shifty-eyed, during, you know, like it's all things that he does when he gets nervous. Talks at a like higher rates, higher frequency, like just all that stuff that kind of tells the interviewer that he's a little tense.
Right. I mean, or whatever, right? But nothing positive is going to come out of those kinds of nonverbal, right? It could be viewed as nervousness, tension. Could be worse, right? I mean, who knows what the interviewer is thinking while someone is, you know, engaging in those kinds of behaviors. So definitely someone who probably would benefit from some significant practice, right? And some guidance to try to help them improve. Yeah, because most of those things are going to be interpreted somehow negatively during a job interview. Yeah, Angela made an interesting comment before about nodding versus shaking your head. Again, in different contexts, in international contexts, they can mean the opposite.
It's weird for us, but it is common for others.
Yeah, exactly, right? And we even mentioned genders. There's even kind of a gender difference, or a number of them actually, that have to do with head nodding, even in this culture. A good example of that would be when communicating, women, at least in this culture, when they're nodding their head during a conversation, means something very different from a man who's nodding his head during a conversation, right? If a woman is nodding, what does it mean, generally? Well, let me do it the other way. If a man is nodding his head, what does that typically mean? He agrees, right? He agrees with, wholeheartedly with what's being said, right? That gets the head nod from a man. But if a woman is nodding her head up and down, it means, I understand. I'm not necessarily agreeing with any of this. I'm hearing you, right? I'm hearing what you're saying. So, again, it's then one that you end up with not only cross-cultural communication issues, but cross-gender communication issues where, maybe a man is interpreting something as agreement, when in fact all she's saying is, I'm listening. I'm hearing what you're saying and I'm understanding, right? So very good, right? During the interview, you want to make sure that you're, aware of those kinds of issues, using head nodding appropriately and not getting mixed up with cross signals and just head nodding. So, there's so many categories, right? I mean, another example would be crossing your arms. It's another kind of no-no for the interview because crossing your arms can be interpreted as well. Okay, kind of closed, right? Yeah, closed maybe to what's going on, like maybe you just don't trust it, you don't believe it, some kind of closed kind of interpretation. But there are others. What else does folded arms tend to mean?
Conversation's over.
Not open to change, conversation's over, yeah. There's actually another one I'm driving at that trained interviewers are looking for. Go ahead.
Maybe defensive, is that?
Okay. Defensiveness is a good possibility. It's not what I'm headed at, but it's a good one.
Very proud of himself.
Okay, sure could be. Yep, these are all good possibilities. What I'm driving at though is introversion. Generally speaking, for right or for wrong, extroversion tends to be rewarded, at least in the U.S. context. A lot of interviewers are looking for signs of extroversion. They want to have employees who are more extroverted in general. And what the research tells them, and again, trained interviews tend to know this, is that introverts will tend to keep their hands within the frame of their shoulders. They will not let their hands go stray very far from the frame of their shoulders. So keeping hands in here and keeping them crossed in particular is it can be, doesn't have to be, but sure can be a sign of introversion. Whereas, the extrovert has their arms going all over their heads, right? Outside the frame of their shoulder. More of a suggestion of extroversion. So, again, I want to make this all paranoid, or concerned about every little thing you're doing in a job interview. But the point I do want to make is this. I know you guys have probably been beaten to death with the advice of practice. Do some practice interviewing. And I think a lot of people, this is myself included, years ago when I was in your seat, kind of blew off that advice. Like, I don't need to practice. And what I was thinking, kind of stupid, was that I can think on my feet. I can answer the questions. I've done a lot of practicing from the standpoint of, okay, if they ask me this question, I can answer this way, and I probably would anticipate all kinds of questions, and but I kind of missed the boat, right? I mean, the point of practicing, only a small part of it is being able to think on your feet and answer those questions. Maybe the more important part of practicing is to work on the nonverbal cues, right? To have someone who knows what they're doing, watch you, observe you, maybe tape you and walk over the tape, to be able to give you that feedback. Say, hey, look, maybe you didn't realize you were leaning back the whole time, right? Or you never looked the interviewer in the eye of the entire interview or whatever. To be able to, help you with the nonverbal side of things, which, as we're trying to suggest here, are just, so important, maybe even, maybe as important, or in some cases more important than the verbal information that's being passed. So, again, I want to encourage you guys one more time to do that practicing. And maybe not for the reason you think, right? For the nonverbal side of things, which often takes a lot more practice to kind of get right. And by the way, the more you practice, I think kind of the less paranoid you get about, where are my arms, or what is my head doing. By doing a lot of practice, you can become more comfortable, right, with trying to give off the right kinds of signals and avoid the wrong kinds. So anyway, again, a topic I'd love to spend more time on. I do want to kind of move forward, but hopefully we all get a sense of the importance, if nothing else, of nonverbal communication. Next, where I want to go is to discuss what we call barriers to communication. What are the things that get in the way of good communication in the workplace? Many of these are going to be familiar to you guys, but not all of them. So I want to go through what I think is a pretty good list of some of the major barriers to good communication. Stereotyping. I think we all have a good sense of what stereotyping is, right? Where you put something or someone into a category inappropriately, or it doesn't belong, or maybe the category itself is somehow inappropriate, right? Or incorrect. Stereotyping. Not surprisingly, stereotyping can be a big barrier to good communication. I'm not going to call for examples so much because, so many of them can be offensive to somebody. But certainly I can think of stereotypes that people have and how that can get in the way of good effective communication. Filtering, another category of where you get an entire message from somebody, but you pass on only part of it. It's not always a conscious process, but psychiatrists and psychologists tell us that typically it's a conscious process, often done to preserve self-esteem, but not always. There are other reasons why people filter. Can you guys think of an example of filtering in the workplace and how it can get in the way of good communication? An example, filtering in the workplace.
Maybe if you're trying to kind of go around doing it like, say somebody is doing something wrong, you don't want to offend them or hurt their feelings, but they need to fix it, so you kind of beat around the bush and they just don't understand, so it never gets fixed.
Thank you very much. Yeah, a great example, right? And this is going to be relevant to our section on feedback giving coming up. Yeah, you got to give that negative feedback to somebody, but wow, hard to do, right? I don't want to offend this person, I don't want to, whatever. And so maybe you don't pass along the entire message that you probably should for fear of hurting their feelings or offending them or whatever. So yeah, that's a good example of filtering, which can very much get in the way of good effective communication because maybe the person needs to hear the entire thing. Good. Selective perception is kind of the other side of things. It's where you actually only receive part of the message. The full message is being given to you, but you only receive part of it. If that's not kind of clear, an expression, I think they clear it up for you, is an expression, people only hear what they want to hear. Right? They're getting a full message, but they're really only processing or kind of internalizing a piece of it. Can you think of an example of selective perception?
I would take on the flip side of the conversation, say you give someone a review and they're doing everything fantastic except for they have one little thing that they need to fix. And so you give them a review and say, you're doing awesome, but you need to fix this too. And they just focus on that one thing and just think they're doing a bad job when it's the complete opposite.
Yeah, very good. So an example of selective perception, again, getting in the way of feedback. Expectancy effects, right? Here we're talking about the power of expectations. Expectations are extraordinarily important things in the world of perception and communication. There's kind of a chain of logic here. The idea is that our expectations will bias our perceptions, and then that gets in the way of good communication. It's kind of like a multiple-step process, right? Expectations affect perceptions, which get in the way of good communication. Anyone think of an example of how our expectations affect how we perceive it? Call it football thing. Okay, all right. So what do you, can you just flesh that out a little bit?
They had preseason rankings, and then teams ranked high or whatever, and then there's some big games, and still in the top 25,
Yeah, good. Yeah, for those of you who are sports fans, college football fans, you definitely see a lot of that going on. Expectations influencing what people see. Do people see the same thing very differently depending on what their expectations are coming in? Good. What about, again, kind of getting back into the world of feedback here, since we're going to be covering that in some more detail in the next class. Can you think of an example about how our expectations will get in the way of how we perceive things, during the feedback giving session? What if you expect the employee to be awesome? How does that get in the way? Or what if you expect the employee to be terrible? How does that get in the way?
I should be really disappointed if they messed up on a project or missed the deadline or something and held them up on this pedestal if they failed you.
Okay. Good, yeah. And actually, it can go kind of either way. If you have very high expectations for an employee, as you sit down to give them feedback, those negative things sometimes can be overlooked because of those extremely high expectations. I think this person is being so good. That's kind of a blip, right? That just didn't really happen. Let's ignore that. Or as you said, it can go in the other direction where, your expectations are so high that this mistake just becomes this glaring, whoa, kind of moment because your expectations were so high. And of course, the opposite can be true for someone with low expectations, right? It would be something, good, you can blow that off because your expectations are so low, or, might focus on that even more significantly because, using this low expectation. Yeah, for those of you who have, brothers and sisters maybe that you're competitive with, I bet you can relate to that, sort of the perfect child or the not so perfect child, and how those expectations, influence how people see you, the various siblings, and gets in the way of good communication. Yeah. So you guys can, I don't think a lot. But the point is, expectations, they very importantly get in the way of good communication. And it's usually through that middle length of affecting how we perceive things. Projection. We've mentioned this in class before. It's the tendency for us to see our own traits in other people. If I'm an introvert, I assume everyone else is an introvert. I teach a class as if there's nothing but introverts. Or I'm an extrovert, right? I think the other mistake is doing as well. Common for people to sort of assume that other people are like they are. Can you think of an example of how that gets in the way of good communication in the workplace? And we assume that others are just like us.
I mean, say for example, like I wouldn't mind coming in and working on a Saturday depending on the situation. So like, hey Bob, I need you to come in on Saturday. We're gonna stay late and crunch the numbers. Bob could have a huge issue with that. Yeah. So whereas I wouldn't. So.
Yeah, good. Yeah, very good example. You certainly get in the way of good communication there, right? So yeah, we're actually going to talk about this a little bit more next class. And by the way, in case I forget to mention it, it's related to this topic, please make sure that you fill out the locus of control survey for next class, for Tuesday. I believe it's in your syllabus for this section of the class. For the giving feedback class at the bottom, it says, please respond to the survey instrument locus of control scale. I have pages 54 to 56 in your book. Hopefully that's accurate. Please fill out that locus of control scale for Tuesday. We'll talk a little bit about projection and locus of control next time. Okay, some other individual level barriers. There's the halo effect, where we take one trait that a person has and assume that the person has all kinds of other traits on the basis of that one. Can you guys think of halo effect getting in the way of good communication? Again, halo effect, a person has one trait, and that's all that you've observed, and you make all kinds of, assumptions about that person on the basis of that one trait. If you think about it, I'll give you a couple of, just a bit of research on this. Research shows, for example, that this happens with height. People who are tall. When a person sees a tall person, again, at least in this culture, we tend to associate that with better leadership, higher levels of intelligence, more athleticism, all kinds of things that we attach to somebody simply because they're tall, which may or may not be true, right, for that person, but we assume it on the basis of that one trait, which is height. You guys think of other examples of halo effect in the workplace? Yeah.
I had an opportunity once to be a writer, a guy who wrote President, speeches for President Bush. The guy from the top. To be honest, I figured there would be some amazing speakers, but to be honest, he stuttered and it was
that is interesting. Yeah, and so what was the trait that you observed? Was the
I
stuttering?
thought it would be a great speaker yourself, but judging from people's speeches for the President of the United States, but he couldn't speak and stuff. So I guess the halo would have been if he was a speech writer.
Okay.
And that would have been expected,
Yeah.
a speech giver.
Yeah, so the one thing you knew was that he was a speechwriter, and so you made all kinds of assumptions about ability to speak and such things on the basis of that one observation. Yeah, that kind of scale, okay? Go ahead.
Well, how do we differentiate halo effect from the stereotype?
There's definitely connections there, right?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that. Could you say that
I
louder?
was saying, how is it different than stereotyping?
Okay.
Right. Yeah, they are similar, to be sure. But halo effect, I think is a little bit different in the sense that it's always the case where you're taking one trait and generalizing it. Where a stereotyping can be more of a broad set of characteristics. But I mean, there's definitely a lot of connection between the two, right? And by the way, there's also the negative side of halo effect, which is called the thorns effect, which is where it's the same idea. Halo effect, you can see the obvious imagery, the devil and angel. The halo effect is typically used to describe positive things, right? I see tallness and I assume intelligence. The thorns effect is used to describe examples of sort of negative things. You see this all the time, like in those of you who have time to watch television. Think about those of you who watched American Idol last season. You remember what was her name? Susan Boyle?
Oh, yeah, the singer lady.
Yeah, this woman comes out on stage at British Idol or whatever the show is called, and the audience is just, rolling their eyes because she has this sort of, frumpy appearance and, just a very kind of, unattractive kind of appearance, I guess, at least to many people in the audience. So people, you can just tell, we're assuming she couldn't sing because of her appearance. And then she just belts out, this beautiful song, and everyone's just like blown away, like, whoa, we couldn't believe she could sing. The only observation they had was her appearance. It's a classic thorns effect kind of thing, where terrible assumptions can be made about somebody on the basis of only one observation. Lindsay, was that a hand or stretching? Or?
No, I just stretching.
Yeah, no worries. Go ahead.
Also with the stereotyping versus the halo effect, halo is giving people or evaluating them based on one attribute, where stereotyping is because of a membership in a group, you're then giving them certain attributes, right?
Very good, yes. Yes, absolutely. Good.
When I had my internship for American education testing service in China, in our group we need some person who will negotiate with another company to do some trade. And there was a student who was the top one debater when he was in his university. So everyone thought he was very good at debating with together. He will be very good at negotiating. But the result was the opposite, because the person, he only knows how to debate, but he don't know how to listen to other, especially in a tree. So that was a very big bad effect
Yeah,
for us.
good. Good example of halo.
Belong to the
Yes, very much. Go ahead. Yeah, let me just go ahead and move on. We only have a couple of minutes, but I can just kind of knock this slide off, and then we'll save the rest for next class. Perceptual defense is the idea that people will often protect themselves from something in an organization. You might say, well, what do people protect themselves from? Well, actually, that's pretty common. A good example would be change. Right? A lot of times people will resist change. Some new initiative, some new restructuring, something different the organization is doing. You'll find a lot of people being threatened by the new change initiative. And so, whether it's ideas, things, people, whenever you sort of you really need to protect yourself from something in an organization, that can certainly get in the way of the communication, right? In particular, in times of change, when you need good communication going on, people are withholding information, not being purposely vague or reflecting or whatever, not engaging in good communication because of the phenomenon of perceptual defense. Defensiveness and disconfirmation often go together. They don't have to, but often you see them together. Defensiveness is where one or both parties feel somehow threatened or punished by a communication. I think you all know what it means when someone gets defensive, right? Versus disconfirmation, where one or both parties feel somehow put down or made to feel ineffectual or insignificant because of the communication. Again, they're similar, but they're distinct enough that they're given their own categories. Often they happen together, though, where someone feels defensive and or disconfirmed. And again, I think easily think of examples of where that gets in the way of good communication. You're not going to get very good open, discussion from somebody who's feeling, defensive or and or disconfirmed. So we'll continue on this. Actually, the next slides have to do with the survey I had you guys fill out for today. It's the concept of communication apprehension.